The film begins by showing a handsome nurse named Will McIntyre, who is trying to provide first aid to a patient in the emergency room. Thanks to his skill and quick action in performing CPR, the patient's condition gradually improves. The doctor and other nurses praise his outstanding performance. That evening, Will is invited by his friends to go to a nightclub. There, he meets a beautiful girl who has just broken up with her boyfriend. To cheer her up, Will spends the night with her drinking until they're both completely drunk. The next morning, just as Will is about to go to work, he is shocked to find two police officers at his house. Without giving him a chance to ask what was going on, they immediately search his home and find illegal substances in his room. Will is arrested and taken to the police station. It turns out that Will is accused of raping a girl named Jane Tier, who just so happens to be the same girl he met at the club the previous night. At the trial, Jane even admits that Will forced her into sexual intercourse while she was under the influence of drugs. Hearing this accusation, Will immediately denies it, remembering clearly that they only drank together for hours. Unfortunately, Will's defense is not accepted by the jury because of the illegal substances found in his house. In the end, the judge decides that Will is guilty and sentences him to 6 years in prison. After undergoing a body check, Will is immediately taken to the prison along with 3 other new inmates. In the prison van, an inmate named Benji tries to make small talk, while another inmate named Reed, who looks like a nerd, stays silent, intimidated by Benji's tough appearance. After being disturbed by Benji's incessant chatter, another inmate, Jimmy Cove, punches Benji, knocking him out. Upon arrival at the prison, they are welcomed by the other inmates. One of the inmates, a flirtatious guy, tries to hit on Will, who is good-looking. When they exit the van, the 4 of them are ordered to line up, and a female guard approaches to inform them that Will, Benji, and Reed will be placed in the same cell in Sector B, while Jimmy is placed in a separate cell. After receiving their prison uniforms, Will heads to his cell, where he meets his cellmate, Butch. In addition to Butch, Will also meets an inmate named George, who always carries a religious book with him. George asks Will how long his sentence is, and when Will responds that he was sentenced to 6 years but plans to appeal, George remarks that the appeal will take a long time since many inmates here also think they are innocent and are filing appeals. George advises Will to avoid trouble if he wants to survive in prison. Since every inmate is required to work in prison, Will, with his background as a nurse, is assigned to care for an inmate named Fung Poi, who is severely ill, for a daily fee of $5. Unable to refuse, Will accepts the task. That same day, Will begins his work caring for Fung. Even when he starts studying law by reading books on sexual violence cases, Will has to bring Fung with him to the prison library. While Will is walking with Fung, Jimmy calls him from the yard. As he grabs Will's private part, Jimmy asks whether a guard named Walsh, who placed him with Butch and told him to care for Fung, is the one responsible. Will, in pain, agrees to everything Jimmy says. Before ending their conversation, Jimmy warns Will not to trust anyone in the prison. While helping Fung urinate, guard Walsh arrives and informs Will that he has a visitor. At the gate, Will is surprised to see Detective Constable Rossi, the police officer who arrested him. Unfortunately, Detective Rossi brings bad news. Will's appeal has been rejected by the court, meaning he will have to serve his 6-year sentence behind bars. Disappointed by this decision, Will immediately calls his lawyer, Francis Peters, to ask why his appeal was rejected, even though he had met all the necessary requirements. On the phone, Francis explains that it's not just a procedural issue, but Will needs strong evidence to prove his innocence. Therefore, Francis is working on finding someone who is skilled at gathering strong evidence to win the appeal. The next day, Will receives a visit from his mother, who brings Fung with her. In the waiting room, Will's mother gives him a family heirloom that belonged to his late father, hoping it will protect him from harm. His mother also asks how Will is doing in prison, expressing concern that he may not survive the harsh conditions. She is still in disbelief that her son has been wrongfully convicted. In frustration, she screams at the unfairness of the legal system, which punishes the weak and arrests people without thoroughly checking the evidence. Due to the scene, Will's mother is escorted out by a guard. It's a stark comparison where the law only benefits the wealthy. Days pass peacefully for Will in prison, and he starts to become close to several other inmates. He even enjoys watching illegal fights among the prisoners, which happen secretly after bribing the guards to stay quiet. The prisoners bet on their favorite fighters. Unfortunately, Will's peace is shattered when the guards search his cell and find illegal substances hidden under his pillow. It turns out the drugs belong to Butch, who set Will up to avoid punishment. Because of this incident, Will is punished by the head guard, and from now on, he will be under constant surveillance, 24/7. Elsewhere, Francis meets his acquaintance, Julie Nile, another lawyer. Francis asks for her help with Will's case and convinces her that Will is innocent. However, Julie refuses because the judge who sentenced Will is known for rejecting appeals unless there is strong evidence. Julie is unwilling to risk her career as a lawyer. In a joking tone, she tells Francis that if he wants her to take the case, he must pay a $40,000 retainer. Meanwhile, in prison, Will is visited by his friend, John. While talking, Will vents about how he can't forgive Jane, who framed him, leading to his imprisonment. However, John, who is religious, advises Will to forgive Jane one day to live in peace. Despite this, Will remains upset because the accusation has ruined his reputation, causing him to lose his job, friends, and youth. The next day, while Will is working out in the gym, a guard gives him a letter from his girlfriend, Liz, who is John's daughter. In the letter, Liz apologizes for not visiting him in prison because she would not be able to hold back her tears upon seeing him. She asks her father to visit Will on her behalf to see how he's doing. After receiving the letter from Liz, Will becomes even more determined to get out of prison. If he can't find a legal way out, he starts to think of more extreme methods to escape. He goes to Jimmy for help, but Jimmy refuses, not wanting Will to take risks that could backfire. During their conversation, a fight breaks out among the inmates in the yard. Jimmy rushes to break it up, but he is detained by the guards, who mistake him for being involved in the fight. As a result, Jimmy is punished and placed in solitary confinement for a while. Days continue to pass, and several months later, Will, who has behaved well in prison, is moved from the cell he shared with the troublemaker, Butch, to a new cell with his religious friend George. On the other hand, Francis continues to persuade Julie to help with Will's case. Now living more peacefully, Will becomes more focused on studying law, hoping to find a way to win his appeal. However, Butch still bothers him unexpectedly. When Will buys some instant noodles, sustagen milk, and soda, Butch tries to extort his milk. Will bravely refuses, as these items were bought with his own hard-earned money. Butch, shocked that someone dared stand up to him. At lunchtime, Will meets Jimmy in the prison cafeteria. Not only has Will been moved to a new cell, but Jimmy is also now in Sector B, the same as Will. Jimmy offers to take care of the woman who framed Will, but in return, he demands $10,000. Will, who is becoming more religious, immediately refuses. Though he hasn't forgiven Jane entirely, he refuses to ask someone to kill another person. Jimmy admits he has killed before when he was younger, revealing that he is not as good as Will thinks. That night, Will struggles to sleep, consumed by frustration about his misfortune. In a fit of sadness, he writes a letter to Jane, the woman who caused his imprisonment. Crying, Will writes that he is certain he never raped her and that their time together was consensual. While he doesn't understand why Jane did this to him, he also tells her that he forgives her, hoping to live a peaceful life without holding grudges. One day, Butch visits Will in his cell, wanting to challenge him. However, George steps in to help Will, preaching to Butch until he becomes dizzy from the madness of George's words. With Fung watching the door, Will and George hatch a plan to prank Butch. George pretends to perform an exorcism on Butch, using tap water to cast out the demon inside him. Unable to tolerate their antics, Butch gives up and leaves. The next day, Will receives another visitor, Julie. She tells Will that she has learned about his case from Francis. Despite initially refusing, Julie has agreed to take on Will's case because, as a lawyer, she cannot stand by while an innocent person is punished. Will is overjoyed and grateful for her help. After meeting Julie, Will calls Francis to thank him. However, Francis reminds Will to be patient, as the preparations for the case will take time. Just as Will asks when the appeal hearing will be held, the prison alarm suddenly sounds. It turns out that something unexpected has happened. Benji has been found severely injured, close to death. Will is shocked, unable to believe that someone as narcissistic and brutal as Benji would resort to such drastic measures. This incident makes Will realize just how cruel life behind bars can be, where anything can happen outside of anyone's control. However, it also strengthens Will's resolve to become stronger so that he can survive in prison until his release. No longer afraid to confront the guards and stronger inmates who once bullied him, Will begins to form deeper friendships with the other prisoners, even playing cards with them daily. He also trains with Jimmy and shaves his head to look tougher. One day, while showering, Jimmy tells Will that he is going to court for his defense hearing. Jimmy asks for advice, as admitting guilt will add 10 more years to his sentence, but maintaining his innocence means he will face trial and be moved to another prison. Will can't offer much advice, as the decision is Jimmy's alone. He just hopes for the best for him. That day, Will bids farewell to Jimmy, hoping that Jimmy will find justice for himself. While Will is spending time with Feng, guard Walsh arrives and tries to provoke Will by talking nonsense. Seeing his friend being harassed, Feng tries to drive Walsh away, but Walsh strikes him violently, causing Feng's illness to flare up. George immediately charges at Walsh, attacking him. This sparks a fight, and the guards rush in to break it up. A few days later, Will's appeal hearing takes place. Francis and Julie, along with Will's family and friends, are there to support him. During the hearing, Julie presents strong evidence to prove that Will is innocent of the sexual assault charges. However, the opposing lawyer keeps trying to discredit her defense. Despite the pressure, Julie does not give up and works tirelessly to prove that her evidence is valid. Finally, Julie receives the results of a laboratory test showing that the sedative levels found in Jane's urine were extremely low, proving that she was not under the influence of drugs during the incident. This clears Will of the accusation that he drugged her or committed sexual violence against her. A few days later, the court announces its verdict. Will receives good news. His appeal has been approved. That day, Will is officially released from prison. Before leaving, Will says goodbye to his fellow inmates. Feng even cries as he bids farewell to Will, who has become like a brother to him. Although Will has long wanted to leave prison, he will never forget the valuable lessons he learned during his time there. At the end of the film, Jimmy visits Will, who is on vacation at his dream beach. It turns out that Jimmy has also been cleared of his charges and released. They embrace, happy to have both found justice through their patience, perseverance, and determination to keep fighting until the truth set them free, and the film ends.